Hey, and welcome back, friends. I think you're going to love this episode. We have Jeff and Shaunti Feldhahn, and they are best-selling authors. They're researchers. They have some great books.
Yeah, specifically about sexual intimacy in marriage is one of the recent books that they did so much research on. And we're going to talk about that in this episode. The Secrets of Sex and Marriage. 8 surprises that make all the difference. We're going to talk about some surprising data that even surprised you and I.
Oh, yeah.
So we're excited for you to hear this interview. Welcome, Shaunti and Jeff Feldhahn. We're so excited to have you all on our channel today. Thank you for being here.
A pleasure to be with you
We're
all.
delighted. Thanks for having us on.
Yes, and as you know, as our viewers, we only bring interviews to our channel that are going to make a difference for you and your marriage. And so Jeff and Shaunti have a large knowledge base and wisdom based on research around sexual intimacy in marriage. So we are so excited to hear some of that knowledge and wisdom today. And speaking of knowledge and wisdom, we are in the middle of reading this book.
Yeah.
And it is by far the best sexual intimacy book we've ever read.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in getting this, I'll put a link up there. I highly recommend it. And we're reading it together as a couple.
We are. We spend our date nights reading this at nighttime. And we've read several books, but this one completely is different than anything I've ever experienced before because of the research, what you guys have done in the research of it has just blown my mind. What had you decide to research and write a book on the secrets of sex and marriage, and then how has that impacted your relationship?
Well, let me first start out by I'm a Midwesterner by growing up. Sex was not a topic that was on our regular family rotation of conversations.
Right.
It just wasn't. And quite frankly, the most I'd ever talked about sex was when I was a teenager in high school. And that's where I got a whole lot of my information.
Me too.
Wrong information, I imagine.
Mythological information. So I came to this really kind of like, are you kidding me? We wrote this because we felt this is what God asked us to do.
And one of the kind of precipitating factors, if you want to kind of get technical, we had actually, for years and years and years, we've been studying, talking to people, doing these studies, doing these surveys. This is the 12th big nationally representative study that we have done on different topics. But as we interview married couples, as you can imagine, several topics would come up over and over and over again, money and sex.
Yeah.
And so we actually did a big study on the money situation, not like how to budget, but how to have a great relationship around money. And so then it was like, dang, are we going
to tackle the next one? And with fear and trembling, because of today's cultural moment that we live in, this topic of physical intimacy, sex, can be the third rail. If you don't say something exactly nuanced and perfect, you can be canceled. Right. So we went into it with that understanding and just simply saying, Lord, if this is what you ask of us, we'll do it. But you're really going to have to bring in the support around us. And that was Dr. Sytsma, who is just an amazing man. He speaks in seminaries around the nation, teaching individuals on this particular subject matter.
He's also trained thousands of the Christian sex therapists.
Correct. Shaunti and I have studied relationships now for almost 20 years. We know the research. We know the research we've conducted. We know what works, and sometimes it's difficult to apply, but we know what works.
Yeah.
Now, on the topic of money, and also on this particular topic, we didn't fight or argue about either of those two subjects. We just kind of
avoided the conversation.
We avoided it, and we coped, and we kind of managed around it. And that is what we found most couples do. So here's what, Adele, what you said is like, how did I not know this stuff? Well, for the 3 years of our research with Dr. Sytsma and talking with people, gosh, I was going, I got gray hair. I should know a few things by now. How did I not know this? How did I never hear this?
Yeah. So that's the encouragement to the folks who are actually listening to the podcast right now, which is that look, unless you are a sex therapist, which, you know, nothing surprises a sex therapist.
Yeah.
But unless you're a sex therapist, most of this stuff, there's just a lot of little things that are sometimes getting in the way. You just didn't know. And suddenly you have new knowledge in your brain, or you understand what's going on inside of your spouse. And it's like, oh, and it doesn't fix the big issues, but it sure makes them easier to address.
Yes.
And certainly for most people who don't have a lot of people don't have the big, huge issues to deal with. Let me tell you, some of this stuff is just life-changing because it's so simple.
Yes.
Wow. I'm also curious, you came up with 8 surprises that all those surprises are what you're talking about, like things that we did not know before. And now there's such a clear understanding of what they are. What did you find?
So let me say that there were several categories, but a lot of them circle around, about 5 of them, I think, circle around a dynamic that probably most people listening to this have experienced, where you have one person just, it has that sort of simple pain of just wanting more intimacy than is happening, right? Like there's a mismatch where one person has a higher desire, higher sex drive, the other person maybe has a lower sex drive. That's 79% of couples.
Wow.
And one of the things that we saw in the research is that most people think if there's this gap, there's just one reason why. And it's because of this person who has the lower sex drive.
Yeah, right.
It's your fault.
Which is a whole lot of pressure.
Yes.
On that person.
Yes.
On that person. It's like, you know, we're not connected because of you, right? And
the person sometimes goes,
we're not connecting because of me.
Yeah. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And so what we found actually, that a bunch of those 8 surprises are basically, someone actually might have a lower sex drive, but often that's not the reason why you're not connecting.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are those reasons that you're not connecting? And that was the majority of these 8 surprises, is these other things that are getting in the way.
And that can be a solution applied to that.
Oh yeah, like simple
Definitely.
stuff. So let me give you one example,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So one of the most common issues that probably applies to the majority of listeners, I think it was about 2/3 of people in the survey, is that it's not so much about how high your sex drive is, like what your levels of desire are. It actually turns out that people are operating in the process of connecting. They're operating based on mythology and misconceptions that actually come out of like Hollywood, basically.
Or books that we read.
Or books or whatever. We kind of have this idea, this is all subconscious, right?
Right.
But we all, basically almost all of us, have this idea that there's just one process of how connecting works, where, like, it's what you see in the movie. Where,
ideal connecting.
Like, what happens. Yeah. Like you have the guy and the girl, and they look at each other, and there's, like, a spark. Right? And there's a sense of desire, and there's a surge of desire, and they start kissing, and, you know, pretty soon the clothes are off, and they're in bed.
Right.
And the camera pans gracefully away, or whatever. So, but we know that Hollywood puts people in weird, like, situations, but we think that process is just what happens. You feel a desire and you do something about it.
It's how our bodies work.
It's how our bodies work. Well, it turns out it's how our bodies work for one type of desire, but there's actually 2. There's actually 2 primary types of desire. And the second type of desire...
Well, that first type you could
call it initiating desire. It's somebody who feels that sense of desire and may or may not do something about it, but they feel it. They're thinking about it.
on the front end.
On the front end.
Yeah.
And so, but there's a second type of desire, and that's you could call it receptive desire. And here is what just astonished me. And we've been looking at this topic for almost 20 years, because we came across this in our very first research projects, understanding men and understanding women. And Dr. Michael Sytsma was one of our main advisors. So we've been looking at this for years, and I still didn't know that actually the person with receptive desire, the physiology, the biology, it works in the reverse order.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, where the person with receptive desire not only is it that they're just not necessarily thinking about sex, like that's just not something they're thinking about, it's actually that they're usually not feeling a sense of desire.
Right.
And that person has to decide to get engaged with their spouse sexually. It's a decision. And as they go, as their body starts getting stimulated physiologically, and that sense of like arousal starts to happen, assuming that this is all positive, like this is a good-willed relationship, all that kind of stuff. But in the vast majority of cases, that stimulation has to happen, and then they start feeling that sense of desire that maybe their spouse felt 10 minutes ago. Yeah. And so the issue is when we have this subconscious idea that we're both supposed to feel desire, and one of us doesn't
at that moment.
You think something's wrong, like
right.
Like what's wrong with me? Something's, and maybe the higher desire spouse is like, what's wrong with them? And the reality is all the things you tell yourself, like I'm not desirable or something's off with me. Sure. Okay. Maybe there are medical issues. Maybe there is some technical thing that's off. It's possible. But in the vast majority of cases, there's nothing off. There's nothing wrong. You just have two different physiologies.
Wow.
And so knowing that, it drastically changes.
And it drastically changes it. With the research that we were able to do on this, we were able to quantify, the percentages of people, male, female, couples, where there is these different desires.
Like, for example, 73% of women have receptive desire.
I would say I'm receptive, and I used to think all the time there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
No, it's just a different physiology. And interestingly, 38% of men have receptive desire. And it often kind of switches as a guy gets like into his 50s and 60s. Like he may have had initiating desire as a younger man, and then he's like, what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
Nothing's wrong.
It's just the way our bodies work.
Yeah.
And so back to that Hollywood kind of mythology of how sex, the process of it works, where we both see each other in that spark of
desire.
We would call that both having initiating desire, both feeling it at the front end.
Right.
The percentage of couples that identified as having that?
10%.
How much?
10%.
Wow.
So 90% for the rest of us, it's something different. And so the image that we've been putting in our hearts and minds and thinking it's normal is completely
not. There's nothing wrong.
Nothing wrong with it.
If both people have initiating and initiating desire, awesome. Go for it.
Yeah, we had a conference that we were speaking at a couple of weeks ago, where a husband and wife sitting in the front row, and we say these sorts of things.
We say that number.
And we give these, and they look at each other and high five right in the middle of the talk. So hey, if it's you, awesome.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us, the 90%, it's just understanding how we're wired. And then what do we do with that?
Well, that just brings up a question for me. There's already a big gap there that I can see in our understanding of how our bodies are made.
And expectations.
And then you add trauma to that. I imagine there is so many more roadblocks to get over to have a sex life thrive again.
Absolutely. So do you mind if I just jump in on that? Yeah. So one of the those are the two primary types of desire. And that, it applies to 97% of the population or something. One of those two. But there is a third type of desire, so to speak, that you could call resistant desire. And it is often tied to things like trauma, to an unsafe relationship, to other issues that have happened in the past. Like if there's been infidelity and you're still coming back from that and trying to figure out what's going on emotionally under the surface, that resistant desire is not the same thing of that 3% of the population-ish. That is not the same thing as not being interested.
Makes sense.
Because not being interested is what receptive desire feels like. You're not thinking about it. It's not part of the conversation in your head.
Yeah.
But for resistant, it's an active fear of sex. It's a It is a pushing away. It is avoiding any situation that could possibly lead in that direction, never wanting to connect that way. And so there is often something else going on under the surface that is causing that. And it is masking what your normal physiology is. Because that person is usually either initiating or a receptive desire if they hadn't experienced that trauma or a relationship issue that's really feeling wrong or whatever. And so once they deal with that resistant desire, like what is it that's underneath that, and they get freedom from whatever that is under the surface, then often that person is like, oh, I'm actually initiating desire, or oh, I'm actually receptive desire.
And that's where the trained sex therapists
right.
I mean, honestly, if I can say one thing about the past 3 years of research, if you're struggling in some of these areas, particularly there, maybe a book, maybe a podcast, all of that stuff can help in some way. But to get true deliverance and healing, you need the professionals, those who are trained and skilled in this area. And it's important for our relationships to seek that out.
Yeah, it really is. It may not, for somebody who has that resistant desire, it may not feel important, right? Like, because it may feel like the furthest thing from what you want to do.
Right.
But we can actually tell you statistically that it's worth it to pursue that, because to pursue that healing, to pursue whatever it is, dealing with whatever is underneath the surface, because we just saw over and over again, these were, like we said, these are big, expensive, nationally representative studies. So this is not our opinion. And the numbers were crazy. For the people who avoid sexual intimacy, who pull away from it, who don't connect with their spouse that often, it often leads to this host of like issues and problems in the marriage, not just in the bedroom, right? But in the marriage. And
impacts the happiness.
It impacts the happiness of both of you. And there's all this, I could get into the statistics if you want to nerd out about it, but it was just overwhelming, the numbers were. And so if you deal with it, and even if it's like, okay, this is hard to deal with, but even as you go, you'll start seeing some improvements, and hopefully that will be the best possible incentive to continue. And, you know, it doesn't always work out like we would wish a movie would work out with the, you know, the perfect ending where everything is working perfectly. But it's, even if what you're doing is getting towards healing a step at a time, it's still worth it to take that step, to take those steps. So.
Yeah, and what I also hear you saying, it's worth it because God designed sex for marriage to be wonderful, amazing, a bond, a connection that we don't get anywhere else in this world. And some of the things you were describing, I thought we were struggling in our sex life, that I would pull away, and there were a host of all kinds of issues under the surface in both of our hearts that we couldn't even access what God had available for us. But once we started getting that healing, like you talked about, the reconnection, sexual intimacy is like off the charts. It's so bonding, and it's just the most special time between a husband and wife. But I think it takes work to let go of all that stuff that you need healing from.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I have several close friends who deal with like having been sexually molested as a child, and you know, these like incredible traumas. And you know, one person who's close to me who in their previous marriage, that they had really significant impacts from a husband that was not a nice person. Wow. And that kind of stuff can create, understandably, that, right? And the really beautiful thing there is, for several of these friends, I've watched personally as they've walked through some of this healing, and I've seen exactly what you're talking about, that process actually creates so much more intimacy in the marriage, not just the physical intimacy, but the emotional intimacy. So,
wow. I love that you're talking about this and the resistance side. That is a lot of our clients deal with some of that side because of betrayal, because of things in their past, because of things their spouse chose to do. But what I want to go back to is the other two types you were talking about before that.
Initiating and receptive.
Thank you. What I heard you saying in there is there's a gap. There's a gap of expectations and then reality, and then there's this disappointment between the two. And then I heard you say that that gap can be moved around by just the knowledge of that there's two types of people.
Well, yes, not just the knowledge, but the working with it rather than against it.
Yeah.
So it's based on what do you do with it. So if you don't,
Yeah,
I mean, I
please
can, do you want me
share
to
this.
jump in on?
Yeah.
There's guys listening to this, and I'm speaking as a guy, that's all I can speak as, who are going, tell me what to do.
Yes.
You know, tell me how to navigate this.
And there's higher desire wives.
Exactly right, saying, tell me how to navigate this.
Well, okay, and the receptive people too. So
Exactly.
Okay, so I'll give you an example of, there are many, many things that we can do to address this that we don't have time to get into here. But I'll give you a good first start, good example.
Yeah.
So a common way of working with that difference, where one person is initiating and one person is receptive, which is the case, like I said, it's close to 2/3 of people. I have to look up the number, but it's pretty close to that. 2/3 of couples.
And it can be husband initiating, wife receptive, or wife initiating, husband receptive.
Yeah. And so if you're working with that, whoever is the initiating desire spouse, one of the things that's really helpful is to give the receptive desire spouse some sort of anticipation time, some sort of like, here's what I'd love to have happen later. Because otherwise, the person with receptive desire just isn't thinking about it. Like, it's just...
Amen.
Yeah, thank you. It's not on the radar screen as much as the initiating desire person thinks it should be on the radar screen, and they wish it was on the radar screen.
I've done all these things. I've been to the gym. I've done. You should
took out the trash.
Want me the same way I want you.
Right.
And so, and that initiating desire person should feel like it shouldn't be this way, but it is, right? Like, it's just the physiology. Like the gym example, you often say, if we go to the gym together.
Yeah, I don't expect Shaunti to bench press the same weight amount as I do. I know that she's different. Her physiology is just different.
Yeah, women don't often have the same upper body strength, blah, blah, blah.
Yet when it comes to another physical thing, sex, I expect her to be exactly like thee.
Yeah. And it just doesn't work that way.
Work.
And so anticipation time is one example of way of working with it rather than against it. We're literally, and let's switch the stereotype for a minute. Okay, let's say that we're talking to the 10% of women out there who have initiating desire.
I think it's 24%.
Oh, 24%.
24% of
10% of couples.
Couples.
In 10% of couples, yes. Okay. So, but let's talk to the 24% of women who have the initiating desire. Okay, just a minute. Imagine that if you and your husband are flipped and he has receptive desire and you have initiating desire, that's the 10% of couples. Okay. And let's just say he's been working on building some sort of shed for the lawnmower and tools and whatever in the backyard. And he's kind of all into this, and that's taking up all his non-work hours. And you're like feeling like we haven't connected in a while. I'm feeling really lonely. Right. And you can say, how about I come out and help you get this done before bedtime? So maybe you can help me later. Kind of like
a flirty little comment.
Flirty little comment. And it's like, oh, like I wasn't thinking about it, but awesome. Let's keep going. And then now I'm thinking about it for later.
Because the receptive desire person enjoys sex just as much as the initiating desire person. It's just that the timing of how the desire arrives is different.
There's an analogy that Dr. Mike, our co-author, came up with that I thought was a perfect way of thinking about it, where think about a car that has its gear shift is in drive. You know how a car is just like it's in drive, it'll just go forward.
Without pushing on the accelerator.
Without pushing on, it'll just be pulled forward. That's kind of the initiating desire person. It's just being pulled forward. But think about, if you think of the receptive desire person as kind of like a car that's in neutral, it's not that it's got the parking brake on. That's more resistant, okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't have the parking brake on, but it hasn't been activated yet.
Yeah.
Something has to happen to put it into drive. And it's just not going to be in drive magically. Like,
you listening
something
to this?
has to happen. And so that's an example. Anticipation time is an example of like, okay, now I'm thinking about it. Let's put it into drive. But without that, you're going to just be all upset for years because your wife doesn't think about it or your husband doesn't think about it. And it's like, okay, be upset. But they're sitting there with their engine idling and they're in neutral and
put them into gear.
Exactly. This is making so much sense.
And it's really difficult for the receptive desire person to be dropped into gear and then be going right at that moment.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the whole microwave crock pot analogy that we've heard over and over.
Yeah.
And there's something to that, but the piece that we've been missing is that the whole thing about the physiology working in reverse order, of the desire literally isn't going to show up. It's just not until that person's physiology starts getting stimulated.
Yeah, because it also brings up for me, and this is, you guys are speaking right to our marriage, so we're over here laughing and enjoying this. But when, the opportunity is dropped on the receptive spouse and they're not in that space and there's a no, it becomes a no regularly. And I know I have felt guilty about that rather than if I have the time to prepare myself and get in that space, it's a yes.
Absolutely. That's the anticipation time thing.
Yes.
Anticipation time is usually not 30 seconds.
Right.
Right. Anticipation time is like the morning of, or that afternoon when you're like flirting.
And let's just be clear here for those who need to hear this with initiating desire. We're not saying that you're having to warn your spouse. It's not a warning. It's anticipation. She's going to look, or he's going to look forward to it.
Yes.
So it's not like, okay, I've got 3 hours to get ready for this. It's not that. It is, oh, yeah, that'll be great.
As long as the relationship is positive and there's all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Now, but let me be clear. Just so that anybody who's listening to this who's a receptive person and is like, but I don't know that I'm like anticipating it in the way that you say. Part of the, what's the right word? There's like a scale, okay? And if you are in a season, let me just use the example that's most common. If you are in a season where you have a bunch of little kids, you're working full time, your body is tired, it is actually more difficult physiologically to feel that sense of anticipation. And in that case, it's actually often, it is going to be a choice. It's not like, ooh, now my engine's running and I'm looking forward to, hopping to bed. I'm looking forward to being with this person. I'm looking forward to connecting. I know that that's going to be good, but I am tired. And like my engine isn't running yet. And that's common too. There's a whole spectrum.
And now, one segment that we haven't talked about is what happens when both parties in the marriage are receptive desire.
Right.
Like, we talked about that. Yeah, what do you do about that? And Shaunti always says, do you just sit there and look at each other? Is that all that happens?
Yeah.
And we found from the survey and from the interviews, a lot of couples who fit that category.
Which is actually 25% of couples fit that category. We're both a receptive.
And so what they found was they just have to handle things different, and typically they schedule it.
Yeah.
They just it sounds not particularly romantic, but because both of them know that this is an important part for our marriage to thrive. Yeah. It's an important aspect, and we both want it. We're just oftentimes not thinking about it. We get busy with life. And so they've managed to figure out a regular schedule that they would adhere to, and it works for them.
Wow. So let's talk about communication. What did you find about communication around this topic?
So the numbers are actually kind of hilarious. And it's the same with money. Both of these two topics are topics that we most need to communicate and we most don't. Yeah. And we most avoid or find awkward or, I don't want to talk about it.
And I don't want to hurt their feelings or I don't want to get upset or whatever it is.
And it's going to cause conflict, so you just, you navigate around it. And so what we found with this topic is that 27% of couples can talk about it well.
Wow.
73% can't.
Wow, that's
73% are kind of avoiding it, or okay, we can talk about it, but it feels kind of awkward, so let's avoid doing that as much as possible. Or just they don't talk about it ever. It's somewhere on that spectrum is 73%.
And you get the statistic of the couples that do talk about it well, and then frequency?
Yeah. So here's the encouragement for people who are like, actions speak louder than words. Okay. The reality is, without the words, you may not be getting as much action. Because we found that the people who were the really good communicators, the people like who were in that, like, it may not always be perfect, but we try to talk about it. Like they're closer to the top end of the communication scale. That 61% of that crowd has sex at least once a week or more. And once a week tends to be, it's not like something that everybody should aim for, but it does tend to be a bit of a tipping point for a lot of good outcomes in marriage. There's a lot statistically tied to it. Not that, less than once a week is
You're on
terrible.
The road to...
Right. It's just that tends to be a bit of an average of, where things start to look like they improve in a lot of ways. So anyway, 61% of people with that good communication have sex once a week or more. People who have bad communication, so they're like not just in the middle, but they're down here on the end. People who have bad communication around sex, it's 6% of them have sex once a week or more.
Wow.
6%.
Versus 61.
94% of them have sex less than once a week.
Wow.
And so it's a real encouragement, like learning how to talk about this and not avoid it is actually one of the best things that you could possibly do to have more intimacy and more actually sexual connection. And it's one of the key misunderstandings is that makes people avoid it is they kind of think that what you're talking about is technique and body parts, and like how often we're connecting, and we've only had sex, twice this month, and what's wrong with you? And the reality is that if you go all the way back to what we said at the beginning about that disconnect, somebody wants it more than somebody else, 79% of the population. And I said, it's not just because this person has a lower sex drive. There's all these other reasons. And it's like do you have initiating desire or receptive desire? Or there's all these other expectations and fears and other stuff that, we're not going to have time to get into today. But the issue is to communicate about that stuff.
Yeah.
You're not arguing about how often and why aren't you and whatever. Because that will lead to an argument.
Yeah.
Right? That will lead to you wanting to avoid it. But if you're like, tell me what it feels like to have receptive desire. Like to me, that means you don't desire me. What does it feel like to have that physiology? That's communication.
Yes.
Right? Like that solves that problem.
And is there anything I could do to,
what kind of
be curious?
What kind of anticipation time? What does that mean? Does that even work for you? Yeah. So anyway, it's the communication thing is absolutely a pivotal point.
Wow. I remember the first time Travis and I really communicated about our sex life, and it was mind blowing what we learned about each other. We weren't comfortable talking about that. So we avoided it, and once we did start to communicate, we started to learn that there was this whole world we weren't accessing. And so thank you for sharing that. And for those of you watching, we are going through their book and we're learning way more. And it opens up so many conversations, like exactly what you're talking about is going through this and then discussing what it is that you learned from reading this book. So I highly recommend you grab their book, read it as a couple, and just see, what comes out of that.
Yeah, we just talked about one thing out of many.
Yes,
here.
It's full.
Just one thing out of many. And I love what Jeff, you were coming up with these questions that as another partner you can ask. And there's some in here that you can have good discussion about. As you're reading through this as a couple, you can go through this, you can have great conversations, great discussions in a safe environment, create a safe environment for the two of you to be able to do that. And it's powerful. I can't wait to have another conversation with you guys. I know we're up on time now, and hopefully we can have you back to talk about many other of these secrets in here. Yes. Wow, what a blessing. Now, before we jump off of here, would you mind sharing with our listeners how they can find more about you, about resources that you provide, and they can connect?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that we did with Dr. Michael Sytsma, our co-author, is we know that there are a lot of people who are in those like specialized situations. Like, for example, 31% of women in our survey have pretty significant sexual pain. Sexual pain at least 1 out of every 3 times they have sex. That's a big number.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's one of those things that, like, if you're in that situation, it's like, okay, but then that makes me like shy away from, connecting. And there's all sorts of things out there like that. Pornography, ED, depression, the impact of medication, like there's all that kind of stuff. And so we actually created a website that is a place that we intend to continue to put more resources on. It's the same as the book. It's secretsofsexandmarriage.com.
Okay.
And on there are articles like, okay, what about sexual pain? Like, what do you do with that? What about pornography? What do you do with that? And some referral resources to specialists who can actually help with those specific things.
Wow, that's a great resource. Thank you.
Yes, secretsofsexandmarriage.com, and let's put a QR code up for that on here. Wow, thank you guys. It's such a blessing to be with you, such a blessing to have a great conversation with you. And I know this right here is also going to further the kingdom of God, because husbands and wives will be able to see this, get more information. And how much better is what Jeff said, the happiness in the marriage whenever couples can connect. Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of the things, core principles that we've learned over the 20 years of the research, and it is that if a couple has a sense of hope in their marriage, they can usually make it through just about anything.
Yeah.
But when futility settles in, like it's never going to change, this is just how it is, then hope evaporates. And the marriage is really in a challenging state for survival. So we hope that, all that you all are doing and all that we are doing helps people develop that sense of hope. Because it's true.
Yes.
We should be hopeful. We can do this.
Yes.
Amen.
Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you both so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having us. I was telling Shaunti as we were learning all this research stuff, I said, I'm really grateful because I guess, because we both have, initiating desire.
That's really
so important. And she looks at me and said, not so much. And I went, you're kidding me. And so here's what had happened. Over the course of our marriage, she knew how important it was to me. Yeah. So she made those efforts, even to appear, at least in my eyes, as initiating because she loved me.
Wow.
Because she wanted me to have that level of joy, even though it was a stretch for her.
And what being purposeful.
Being purposeful. But what that does for me is it makes me want to be a better man for her.
Yeah.
And it's that virtuous cycle. Once you know this, that your spouse is doing these things for you because they love you. Yeah. My gosh, we'll run through a wall for that.
Amen.
Right?